too many instances in the past. The tax burden of the next generation picking up the farm was too great, and you saw lots of people move off the farm. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has been big for America's farmers.
So we want to make sure that we're talking about the importance of extending these provisions, keeping bad ideas out of the tax code.
Hello and welcome to the Cobcast, Inside the Grind with the National Corn Growers Association. This is where leaders, growers, and stakeholders in the corn industry can turn for big picture conversations about the state of the industry and its future. From the fields of the Corn Belt to the DC Beltway, we're making sure the growers who feed America have a say in the issues that are important to them, with key leaders who are shaping the future of agriculture. So make sure you're following this show in your favorite podcast app and sign up for the National Corn Growers Association newsletter at ncga.com. I'm Dusty Weiss, and I'm just going to go ahead and wish everybody a happy tax day here, in that tax day could ever be a happy occurrence for anybody. But a quick reminder as well that if you haven't checked that off your to-do list yet, go ahead and step away from the podcast for a moment and finish up your duties there. We'll be here. We're not going to be talking about anything that is necessarily timely to your 2024 taxes yet. We're going to be looking at the future of tax policy and what it means for growers, and some of the pieces that are set to expire this year with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Joining us today to talk about these important issues are Nebraska farmer and chair of NCGA's Risk Management Action Team, Andy Jobman. Andy and his team have been preparing for this year's big tax conversations on Capitol Hill for a while now. Andy, first and foremost, great to see you again. It's been a minute. Last time we talked, we were actually in D.C., out there advocating on behalf of growers on a different issue, trade with Mexico. But it's good to see you again. How are things out in Gothenburg?
Hey, thanks for having me on. Great to see you again, too. Yeah, things are well out here in Gothenburg in central Nebraska. Finally had some decent rain last night. I'm looking outside to a few puddles. It's been a while for some rain as well.
Thank goodness you went from an unplantably dry mess to an unplantably wet mess. That's exciting times.
Yep, I'd rather have that kind of mess.
That's good. That's good. You'll have some work to do real soon, I bet. And joining Andy today, of course, is NCGA's policy expert on tax and farm policy, Wayne Stoskopf. He'll be helping give us the big picture for where this tax talk might lead and why the term budget reconciliation should be on our radar. So, Wayne, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, happy to be here. Thank you.
So, Andy, can you get us kicked off a little bit by telling us more about your operation in Nebraska? Your family's been out there working that land for a while. Tell us more about what you're growing out there and what you're seeing.
So our operation is a family operation, like over 90% of the farming operations across the U.S. I farm with my younger brother and my dad, and we raise food-grade white and yellow corn for Frito-Lay. So all of our corn actually goes towards human consumption through Frito-Lay's various products like Doritos and Tostitos. We also rotate our corn with soybeans, grow a little bit of alfalfa to support our cow-calf operation as well. So a medium-sized operation by any argument's sake, almost 100% irrigated. We do not get enough rain to rely on that alone. And so most of our crops are supplemented with some sort of irrigation. A lot of that is center pivot irrigation. So, as you're flying across the Midwest, going from coast to coast, you see the circles down below. That's us.
Bullseye marks the spot, right?
That's right.
Just got to pick the right one. Well, yeah. Andy, and I've got to say, it's a beautiful farming operation as well. I was actually just telling Wayne that your operation in Gothenburg, Nebraska will forever be representative in my mind of NCGA, because when I started working with NCGA, golly, like 6 years ago now, the first thing that I saw was a bunch of video footage that Neil Caskey sent me to edit together for a web video, and it was all shot on your farm. And so it really helped me get my head in the game as far as what's going on with our members, what their operations look like. But from what you do out there to what you do with NCGA, what got you interested then in NCGA's risk management work?
Well, it's a good question. Previously, I was on our stewardship action team and was involved in conservation programs, different cost share programs that allowed farmers to implement sustainability practices on their farms. And some of that is tied back into the Farm Bill. After I kind of went through the leadership position on that, like had an interest in the risk management team, also very heavily involved in the farm bill, also involved with taxes as well. And, when I started farming professionally, not just carpet farming back in the day, but when I started farming professionally, we were going through a lot of changes in farm programs. That's, when ARC and PLC kind of came into being. And so I remember as a young producer going through all of the education events that universities and different extension offices would put on to educate producers on, here's this new safety net program and how it works. And here's everything you need to know about which one to sign up for. I just remember that being a really kind of confusing and also fascinating time all at once, and thought, hey, this sounds like a really interesting team to be a part of, since that's exactly what they focus on.
It might not be the thing that most growers want to take an interest in, but where the rubber meets the road of the black and the red and the ledger at the end of the year, it's one of the most important things.
It really is. We farm to survive on our own. We want good markets. We want strong demand for our products and high prices, right? But ultimately, we do need to have that safety net program to keep American farms in business from one year to the next and from one generation to the next. Yeah, like you said, it's not obviously the most glamorous or exciting topics to talk about every single day, but they are very important and do require a lot of expertise. And I'm thankful to have Wayne on staff. He's the man when it comes to not only the programs that we have, but also kind of the history and how we got to where we're at. So we certainly couldn't do what we do without Wayne's input.
I can imagine you guys have gotten to know each other real well over the past few years here. But Wayne, as the staff lead for risk management, working with Andy and the risk management action team, also as our resident expert on the subject, how do you help the team determine what to focus on for the future? And how early did you have to start preparing for tax policy changes that might be ahead here in 2025?
It's certainly a balancing act of all sorts of farm policy, tax policy, changes in administrations, the political landscape. And we try to sprinkle in topics ahead of time, so it's not a big kind of bolus all at once where you're trying to digest everything all in one conversation. I'd say on tax policy, we really started digging in early in 2024 and then set up a project that then could provide us more information throughout the year as we were thinking about Congress beginning to put the wheels into place for this train that's going to leave the station later this year. A lot of folks are saying it's the Super Bowl of tax for 2025, and we were in the mode for the last 2 years that we were in the Farm Bill. It's a Super Bowl of Farm Bill policy. It's the big arenas. So we've been trying to do both walk and chew gum. And really, it took a lot of effort to just be at the point where we could start calling the plays in the Super Bowl that is happening now.
So tell me a little bit more about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act then. This is something that's important to farmers, but why is that? Let's lay it out on the table what the benefits have been for America's growers here.
Yeah, so the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has been a really big, helpful policy item for America's farmers and ranchers. This comes as no surprise to any producers that are listening, but farming is a very capital intensive industry. Land is expensive, machinery is expensive, all of the inputs are expensive. When you start talking about running these operations as businesses, tax is a huge item, especially when you're passing an operation from one generation to the next. And recently, we've had some lower commodity prices, right? So profitability hasn't been there. We've relied on not only our farm programs, but also a lot of disaster and economic assistance programs to help shore up these losses across much of the growing regions across the United States. Obviously, we're always looking for new markets, new opportunities to grow that demand. Biofuels and trade and livestock consumption are three main buckets of where corn growing goes, right? And, one exciting opportunity we have is sustainable aviation fuel, possibly in the future. So that's one opportunity we have. But the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has really helped provide a lot of security and stability in terms of having an operation decide, okay, how am I going to keep this operation profitable? And how am I going to keep this operation moving from one generation to the next?
And Wayne, from your perspective in D.C., the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, this is something that's been on the books for a number of years here, but it's due to expire, right? It was put forward as sort of a temporary provision here? When is it due to expire, and what sort of deadline are we facing?
Yeah, the provisions that Andy's talking about expire December 31st, stroke of midnight, the end of this year, 2025. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act overall also included a lot of really good provisions that have supported the economy on the corporate side. And many of those provisions are permanent, but the provisions on the individual side that impacts more of our farms, ranch, small businesses, a lot of those were set to expire at the end of this year. And a few, like bonus depreciation, were stair-step down. So we've already seen an impact in the past couple of years of those provisions expiring a bit earlier.
So, Andy, then, as we're coming up on that expiration date and talks are getting underway in D.C. to extend potentially the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, what are some of the provisions that are a top priority for corn growers?
Yeah, so about a year ago, we started a study to really evaluate the most important ones to corn farmers, and used example farms from across the country. Some of them are our own membership, and looked at different sizes of farms too, right? Because there's all different kinds of farming operations out there. There's single household farm, multi-generational farms as well, where you get several generations, several households living off of the same operation. And then operations even bigger than that, right? That have a lot of hired help. So we really broke it into 3 different categories based off of size, and then evaluated how both extending and repealing these different facets of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act would affect each one of those operations. And I don't think necessarily we found anything to be incredibly surprising. Rather, it solidified our arguments and the importance of these different tax code items, and maybe emphasized which ones are maybe even more important or had a greater effect than maybe even we imagined they would.
Well, why don't we start with the Qualified Business Income Deduction? What is that, and how does that hit the bottom line at a family farm?
Yeah, so the Qualified Business Income Deduction allows an operation to deduct 20% of an income as a qualified deduction, right? And that helps level the playing field a little bit for farms that are not organized basically as a corporation, which is the majority of farms across the United States. And as we looked at that, 20% sounds like a pretty good number, right? Like that's a sizable amount of any person's income. But really in our study, the effects of that actually wound up to be 2 to 3 times that in terms of what the actual dollar amount meant to different operations. And of course, that varies a lot from year to year. In some instances, that 20% may not be that big in terms of dollars. Maybe it wasn't a very profitable year, maybe it was a drought year, or we had a hail event, or, crop insurance event where all of a sudden the income wasn't there, right? And so we found that item to really vary a lot from year to year, and was very dependent upon the events and economic situation that each farm found itself in from year to year, but yet was still a very important asset for each farm to be able to take advantage of.
Okay, there's another provision out there that we want to protect. It's called the 100% bonus depreciation. What's that one, and what does that mean? I recognize that term. My accountant has said that to me, but I don't know what the heck it is.
Yeah. So depreciation is something that farmers take advantage of, and really many businesses across America take advantage of, right? So that's the ability to deduct the cost of a capital purchase. Say it's a large piece of machinery like a combine or a tractor or even a storage shop, and deduct that cost over time. Well, the 100% allows you to deduct that amount in the year that it was placed in service. So like say I bought a tractor last week, right? If I, at the end of the year, have had a really great year and I have a higher than expected income, I can elect to take that depreciation 100% in this year. What that allows me to do is offset some of my tax liability that I would have this year, right? So rather than write my check and pay my taxes, I'm going to in turn say, hey, I'm actually going to count all of this year's purchase of that tractor in this year. And in some instances, this comes into play maybe more so towards the end of the year after I've evaluated what my profitability is for this year. Machinery is expensive. Large items that we use every day, they wear out. They need to be replaced, right? We want to keep up with the most accurate and precise and efficient technology as we can, because farming is a very small margin game, and so they can spend that dollar on Main Street America at their local dealership. That dollar is multiplied through the local economy, and that's why that 100% deduction exists. Taxes are important. Like, we need tax income to fund defense, fund the government for roads, bridges, what have you. But at the end of the day, if you find yourself in this lucrative position and also are in need of making a capital investment in your operation, here's a great way to offset some of that tax income, but still be able to keep your operation moving forward and support local businesses at the same time.
Right. The grower gets a new piece of equipment, which very often is more efficient or even better for the environment. Let's make sure we don't miss that. But also the local dealer, they're able to create jobs of the people that sell and maintain that equipment. And then on up to the equipment manufacturer, the people that build that combine too. They're moving another piece of equipment out of the factory and helping support those good factory jobs as well. So it really runs all the way through the economy.
Yeah. One interesting thing that we found, one might think like, oh, well, this is really benefiting like just the very large producers. But honestly, even in our study, small and medium farms showed 100 to 300% increase in tax liability when we didn't have this available. And so these farms would be burdened with much higher tax liabilities, still would have to be needing to purchase that new tractor, but all of a sudden weren't able to, right? Because they weren't able to offset that taxable income with the purchase. So it affected both small, medium, and large operations, which I think was maybe a little bit of a surprise, just in terms of how much it actually impacted farms of all scales.
Yeah, that's an incredible figure right there, that 100 to 300% times tax liability. I mean, that can be the difference between profitability and a very, very bad year for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
But another provision that we're interested in protecting here, of course, is the higher estate tax exemption. Now, this comes into play when an operation transitions between generations. Can you tell us a little bit about this and why it's important to preserve?
Yeah, absolutely. And in order to kind of understand this, we kind of have to walk through a little bit of where we were before and where we are, and then potentially where we're going. So before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, an individual would be exempt upon their death, or they could exempt up to $5 million of assets when they transfer that asset onto their heirs. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act effectively doubled that to $10 million per individual, and then indexed it for inflation. So really, eventually that $10 million becomes $13 million as an individual, $26 million as a married couple. Sounds like a huge amount of money, and it is.
It would be a big pile of money, but we're talking about assets here.
That's right.
We're talking about the ground that you grow in. We're talking about the machine shed out back. And it's not that those things have gotten bigger or nicer over the years. It's that the value has gone up. So when these transitions happen, it's not like somebody's getting a huge pile of money. They're getting the same operation that's been there for generations. It's just valued so much more now because of inflation.
Yep. That's 100% correct. To an outsider looking in, it seems like an outrageous figure, right? But when you start breaking that down, I mean, one average field out here in central Nebraska on the market today would bring well in excess of $1 million. That's just one field. Most average operations probably have 10, 12, 15 fields, of an average size. And so you start adding that up, plus, like you said, the cost of machinery, buildings, the value of everything is always going up. And so to be able to pass that on without having to start over with every generation, right, is really important. This is also set to expire this year, and it rolls back to the original amount. Index for inflation would be about $7 million. So that's a huge difference, right? When you're talking about tax planning, family succession planning, like these are plans that most families and operations don't change daily, right? We can't change daily. Like most decisions in a farming operation about renting land or making a purchase of machinery or making an additional purchase of land, like these are very, very long-term plans. In many instances, is not just planning for like my generation, but also planning for my kids' generation, should they choose to come back and farm.
Well, and when you're talking about that estate tax exemption, that could be the difference between the next generation taking up the reins and continuing the family farm, or even just throwing their hands up and walking away and saying, I'm done. I'm going to go get a job in town.
Yep, that's exactly right. Too many instances in the past, the tax burden of the next generation picking up the farm was too great. And you saw lots of people move off the farm, which is really unfortunate because we lost a lot of really great people in rural America. And there's fewer people. Farms have to get bigger in order to survive. It's not necessarily that farms want to be thousands and thousands and thousands of acres big. Like that takes a lot of management, takes a lot of manpower. It's a lot of stress, a lot of risk. But unfortunately, like that's the situation we're in. Like it takes some economies of scale to make these operations run. One interesting thing I thought that came out of this study that we did, when we looked at across America in all facets of businesses and lifestyles, when you compare the number of transfers of assets that are affected by the estate tax and compare that to agriculture, this instance affects agriculture twice as much as the average American household across the United States. And I think that just underscores what we've been talking about this entire segment, is how capital intensive agriculture is and how important it is to be able to pass on these assets from one generation to the next in order to preserve these family farms, right? And preserve these businesses.
So now, Wayne, as our expert in DC on these things, I know that we touched a little bit earlier about the stepped up basis, which is above and beyond just extending these key TCJA provisions. But what are some of those other proposed changes that corn growers are trying to defend against right now?
Yeah, when looking at the landscape, a lot of the changes that Andy's mentioned are pieces that will expire if Congress doesn't act. But the stepped up basis is part of the permanent law, but has been looked at for changes to raise additional revenue for the federal government. And so we saw a serious push probably in 2021, about 4 years ago, to change the way the capital gains rates are structured and to eliminate stepped up basis. And while we don't think it's going to be part of the just straight extensions, we are still messaging against that proposal, which would negatively impact so many farms and that business planning. So we want to make sure that as we're educating new members of Congress and talking about the importance of extending provisions, that we're also not missing that opportunity to educate on behalf of the importance of some of those permanent provisions and maintaining stepped up basis.
It sounds like we've really got to play defense in addition to trying to get the extension to this TCJA stuff as well. Andy, as far as corn growers' priorities long term, we can do tax policy, we can focus on playing defense against some of these provisions that also might come into play that would cause real problems for us. But at the end of the day, the best way to improve the economic outlook for farmers is just to grind more corn. And tax policy can really stimulate demand in the long run too. How does that work?
Yeah, it sure can. As we're looking forward towards expanding that corn grind, there have been several ideas floated around for stimulating new methods of utilizing corn as a resource, particularly for sustainable aviation fuel and a lot of these next generation fuel ideas in terms of increasing blends at the pump, providing more opportunity for consumers to participate in the usage of a clean burning, environmentally homegrown fuel. And so this would be a much more of an offensive, forward-looking idea of, hey, let's incentivize folks to come up and participate in the corn market, expand usage, and at the same time, really improve our energy portfolio for the United States and eventually globally too, right? Aviation affects everyone across the globe. So does liquid fuels. We've seen countless examples, whether it be economic or weather related, where we still are very dependent upon liquid fuels and probably will be for the foreseeable future. And if we can improve that system by including a cleaner burning renewable source, by all means, why shouldn't we do that? And so incentivizing industry to expand on that, I think is an excellent opportunity, increases jobs, increases demand for corn, creates a more profitable and economically viable midsection of the United States that also affects the pocketbooks of everyday Americans from coast to coast.
So certainly this is a time of year when most growers are focused on getting a crop in the ground or getting their taxes taken care of, playing phone tag with their accountants and the like, but it's also really, really important right now for growers to make their voices heard on these topics. We're lucky to have folks like Wayne out in the DC office that kind of manage the day-to-day of this, but corn growers and their supporters really need to carry this message to the offices on the Hill. Yeah, Wayne?
Absolutely. And we've launched a call to action earlier this year to provide some sample messages from growers that can go directly to your member of Congress. Emails, calls, text are all fantastic. And of course, as members are back in their districts and in the states, it's a great opportunity to talk about the importance of extending these provisions, keeping bad ideas out of the tax code, and in some of the tax incentive places, trying some new things too.
The most important voice on Capitol Hill when it comes to agriculture issues is the farmer. We have Wayne up there to keep tabs on everyone in DC and on the Hill on a daily basis. But ultimately, the most important voice is the farmers, right? That voice of experience, people that are living and breathing and getting personally affected by all decisions, right? So far on this call to action, we've had pretty good response. We've had over 1,000 folks participating. If you haven't participated, be sure to visit NCGA.com, make your voice heard there. We've had really great staff that have made it super easy to get involved with a click of a button and a few strokes of the keypad to personalize your message if you would like to. And so we've found that to be a very, very effective way to make issues known to our representatives on the Hill and, add that personal touch of, hey, this is my family, my operation, my neighbors, my community. This is how this issue is affecting me.
Certainly, NCGA does a great job of taking its members from the field and putting them outside of their representatives' doors, knocking on doors, making phone calls, sending emails, connecting with our delegations. It's important work. But as we look to the year ahead, Wayne, I imagine that you probably feel the way sitting in D.C. as I do sitting here in Wisconsin. I'm not the kind of guy who's going to try to guess what's going to happen next in DC, but can you give us the lay of the land a little bit at least on how these extensions may or may not move forward?
Absolutely. Given the amount of tax provisions that expire this year or have already expired, there will be legislation to extend them. The legislative vehicle that they're talking about using is budget reconciliation, which can rely just on a simple majority in the House and in the Senate. So it really unlocks the potential for larger pieces of legislation impacting spending and also revenue to go through with a simple majority and can skip the cloture process in the Senate. So there will be a big package called budget reconciliation put together throughout the spring and hopefully move in the summer. Everyone in Congress knows that business certainty is really key, and they want to get ahead of the deadline of December 31st as much as possible. So we've heard everyone from President Trump to members of Congress talk about one big, beautiful bill. That's the focus right now, including tax in that conversation to get business certainty across the finish line as quickly as possible.
Well, and we know that as that situation continues to develop, you'll keep us posted from DC. Certainly, we'll continue to use the podcast as a vehicle to keep folks informed as well, but also check out ncga.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter so you're getting the minute-by-minute updates as well, because this is ultimately an issue that is really, really important to growers. It's also really, really convoluted, and so we really appreciate the two of you sharing your expertise today to get us caught up on these tax policy issues. Andy Jobman from Gothenburg, Nebraska, and Wayne Stoskopf from our DC office. Thank you both for joining us here on the Cobcast.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us again next month for another episode of the Cobcast, Inside the Grind with the National Corn Growers Association. As a quick reminder, while Andy and Wayne might know a lot about this stuff, nothing that we've discussed today should be construed as financial advice. Please try to remember that and make sure you're meeting with an actual finance advisor to stay on top of the latest tax implications of the changes in DC policy. If you are on X, you can follow @NationalCorn for more news and updates from NCGA. Visit ncga.com to sign up for the association's email newsletter and make sure you're following this show in your favorite podcast app. The Cobcast is brought to you by the National Corn Growers Association, and it's produced by PodCamp Media. Branded podcast production for businesses, podcampmedia.com. For the National Corn Growers Association, thanks for listening. I'm Dusty Weiss.